The term medical assistance in dying or MAID is now being widely used in place of the term assisted suicide. The result, however, is still the same. Ottawa is now considering expanding the boundaries put in place to safeguard the practice. Joining me now to talk about it is Alex Schadenberg, Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Alex, welcome back to BCN.
It's great to be with you, Hal.
Alex, a court in Quebec recently struck down the section of Canada's euthanasia law requiring natural death be reasonably foreseeable before a person qualifies for death by euthanasia. Can you share a bit of the backstory on this and the court's reasoning in striking down the law?
Yes, so when Canada legalized euthanasia in June of 2016, one of the requirements of the law was that somebody's natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. So they allowed euthanasia for physical or psychological suffering, but one of the components was that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, meaning terminal illness. Now that was an odd definition anyway. Nonetheless, in September, a Quebec court struck down the requirement that natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. So by striking down that requirement, that changes the law because you would not have to be terminally ill. But also what it meant was that if the law allowed euthanasia for physical or psychological suffering, the only caveat was that you had to be terminally ill. Once you remove that, then it also then clearly allows euthanasia for psychological suffering alone. And this is a difficulty because clearly Canadians are not interested in euthanasia for, mental illness, depression, etc.
Now, the federal government's response to this court decision is Bill C7. Some are saying this bill is really a two-tiered law. Your thoughts on this?
Right. So what the federal government did is that the court decision came down in September, and that was during the election. And the federal government decided not to appeal the court decision. So by not appealing the court decision, then the court decision becomes law. So they have to amend the law, they say. So what they've done is they've come out with this Bill C7. Now, Bill C7 is a two-tier law. It does two things. They kept that natural death must be reasonably foreseeable definition, even though it's sort of awkward. And it really lacks meaning in many ways, because natural death being reasonably foreseeable, well, hell, I think most of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. Nonetheless, it depends, I guess, how you define it. But what it means is that if you are not terminally ill, then you could have euthanasia instantaneously. So what they did is they said that there would be no waiting period. The original law required a 10-day waiting period, and they said under this new Bill C7, the 10-day waiting period would be eliminated for people whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable, who were deemed to be terminally ill. But for those who are not terminally ill, they put in a 90-day waiting period. Now, this is a serious problem, actually, because our Canadian courts tend not to deal with inequality within the law very well. It is my opinion that if they pass Bill C7 as it's written, that the bill will be challenged in the courts very quickly because there's a natural inequality within the law, meaning that if you're terminally ill, you can die immediately, but if you're not terminally ill, you have to wait 90 days. Now let's go one step further. The problem with eliminating the 10-day waiting period is that means that if I'm not having a bad day, and let's put this in a human context, I could have a difficult medical condition, but I'm now going through a bad day. Let's say I got a bad prognosis, bad news. Well, I can then die the same day as I request euthanasia. It gives me no chance or opportunity to change my mind or no opportunity to have a good day.
Now, Bill C7 changes the law to now allow doctors and nurse practitioners to lethally inject an incompetent person, as long as that person consented to death, as you were talking about, by lethal injection before becoming incompetent. Do you see any issues with that?
Yeah, so the other thing they did, so first of all, Bill C7, in my opinion, is a very big problem. And I'll give you a couple of reasons. One is it's gone far beyond what the Quebec court decision said. The Quebec court decision simply said that your natural death being reasonably foreseeable was going to be struck because, once again, it created what they called an inequality within the law. It denied certain people equal rights within the law. But now what they've done is they've expanded the law even further by saying, well, if someone has asked for euthanasia while competent and now has become incompetent, then they can still have euthanasia, death by lethal injection. Well, this is a serious problem because, once again, it denies someone the ability to change their mind. Because what happens is if you're declared incompetent by law, you now cannot change your mind. So there was the case in the Netherlands, there was the court case in the Netherlands that was just completed last year of the woman who had previously had requested euthanasia while competent, and then while incompetent, they came to do it, and she was resisting and saying no. So they put the sedative in her coffee because she continued to say no, she continued to resist. And then she continued to resist even after receiving the sedative in her coffee. So then the doctor asked the family to hold her down as she was given the lethal injection. This is the kind of thing that you lead into when you allow euthanasia for people who are incompetent. There's another serious problem. The doctor cannot confirm anymore that the person continues to want to die by lethal injection because they're considered incompetent. So you're going to have someone lethally injecting someone and you cannot confirm that they continue to want to die. It opens up the question. I also go one step further. It actually is against what the Supreme Court of Canada said in the euthanasia decision, the Carter decision, because they said that the person would have to be competent, and this will allow euthanasia for incompetent people.
So does Bill C-7 allow euthanasia where mental illness is the sole underlying medical condition? And if so, could someone with depression potentially end their life?
Well, this isn't actually an issue that angers me, Hal, because the bill put in a line saying that mental illness is not a disability, disease, etc. under Bill C-7, but in fact that doesn't stop euthanasia for mental illness. So they've actually they're playing a game with us because the bill says that, but that in fact doesn't stop euthanasia for mental illness because the law says euthanasia is allowed for physical or psychological suffering. And psychological suffering includes issues around mental illness. So in fact, this bill does allow euthanasia for mental illness, even though they're telling us it doesn't. And I really get angry when they play these games with us because they're telling us one thing and it actually doesn't actually say that. It actually doesn't definitively do that. They would have to have actually defined psychological suffering in the bill in order to have to say that we're going to prevent euthanasia for people with mental illness. Now, Canadians clearly don't want people with mental illness dying by euthanasia, and so that's why they tossed that line within the bill, but that actually doesn't prevent euthanasia for mental illness. It's a real card game that I'm really upset about.
Do you believe that the safeguards that are included in our assisted suicide laws are written with loosely defined language to allow the laws to be maybe redefined over time?
In fact, Hal, that's exactly what the bills have done. The bills have not properly defined the language within the legislation, and they did that on purpose. So even the original bill did that. What it did is it said that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, but then it didn't define that. And then it had several little loopholes within it. It said that there was a 10-day waiting period in the original legislation, but then it said the doctor could waive the 10-day waiting period. And now, only 2.5 years later, we're actually going to get rid of the 10-day waiting period when someone's defined as terminally ill. So, the whole thing is not designed actually to protect people in a difficult time of their life, because this is actually what we're talking about. Euthanasia is not something that people are demanding. If you look at the data, they're not demanding it because they're in horrific pain. That's what was sold to us. But, there's very few people in that condition actually demanding euthanasia. Usually it's someone who's going through a very difficult time of their life, and they're a human being who's emotionally and psychologically connected to their physical condition. They're asking for euthanasia because they're at a low time in their life. And this is what we're dealing with here. And these laws are not defined on purpose in order to allow expansion over time. We could actually have a whole show on how the law actually expanded between when it was passed until today, just on that alone, looking at how it's being reinterpreted by people who are actually doing euthanasia.
Last December, the Delta Hospice Society was ordered by the province of BC to provide euthanasia or lose its funding. How has Delta really responded to those demands? And what happened since?
Yeah, so this battle's been going on with the Delta Hospice Society, and I have to first make this very clear. The Delta Hospice Society is an independent organization. It's not a government organization. Yes, it receives funding for the healthcare service it provides, but the hospice was actually built with community money. The building itself is not that old. It was built with fundraised dollars in the Delta region of British Columbia, and it did not receive provincial funding for the building itself. So we're talking about an independent organization that is saying we will not do euthanasia. That's contra to what we believe. In fact, in their charter as an organization, as their nonprofit charter says, we do not hasten death. So what the government has told them is you're going to hasten death, you're going to do euthanasia, you're going to do lethal injection, you're going to do this, And if you don't do it, we're going to pull your funding. And they're also intimidating them within that same context, because the letter they've received from the government is not only saying that we're going to pull your funding, it's saying we're going to take over your building. Take over your building. It's an independent organization. It's not part of the LIN or the, how would you say, the local healthcare unit. It's not, it was not even funded by the healthcare unit. It's an independent organization. They're talking about taking it over. This is a very, you know, disgusting thing that's going on if you consider what the government's talking about doing. The Delta Hospice has been responding by saying we're not going to do it. They're seeking legal advice, and the battle's far from over.
Alex, what about the conscience rights of medical professionals? I mean, can Canadian doctors refuse to participate in euthanasia?
So the conscience rights issue is a provincial matter, and so therefore in Manitoba, for instance, doctors have the right of conscience, and they don't have to participate, they don't have to do the act. Whereas in Ontario, the College of Physicians has said that a physician has to do what they call an effective referral, which means referral for the purpose of the act. So you have different rules in different places. So in fact, the answer is a yes and a no depending on where you live. Now the difficulty is, for instance, in Ontario, where the College of Physicians is saying that doctors have to do what they call an effective referral. That means referral for actually doing euthanasia. Doctors are saying, well, I don't believe in euthanasia, so I'm not going to do it, but I'm also not going to refer because I'm not going to send you to the killer. I'm not going to do it. And I think when I say killer, some people might feel uncomfortable, but in fact, we need to call it what it is. Euthanasia is lethal injection. And if you look at the actual law, the law creates an exception to homicide within the criminal code. So if you want to find where the law on euthanasia is, it's under homicide in the criminal code, and they created an exception to it. So in fact, that's what it is. So the fact that physicians are being pressured, some of them have left Ontario. We've lost physicians. Some of them have gone to the US or to other jurisdictions where they're not being pressured or forced to do euthanasia or refer for it.
Now, what about mature minors? These would be children who are considered mature enough to consent to their own medical treatment. Are the Trudeau Liberals possibly going to allow these kids to choose assisted suicide?
So in the original legislation, the law says you have to be 18 and you have to be competent, a competent adult. It also says that you have to be capable of making the decision. So therefore, this whole other question of, people who have become incompetent wasn't part of it. There's been a lot of debate about children. Now, Bill C-7 does not extend euthanasia to children, but at the same time, the government has agreed to starting what they call a 5-year review of the law, which is going to start in June of 2020. So one of the things that actually angers me about Bill C-7 is the government didn't have to do anything. They could have left it alone. The court decision happened. They didn't appeal the court decision. Therefore, whether I like it or not, the court decision was the law of the land because it was not appealed. And they had already agreed to do a 5-year review to start in June of 2020. So therefore, what happens in the near future after the review is done of the law might then mean that they're going to extend euthanasia to children, because there's a lot of discussion about that. Belgium has already done that. The Netherlands allows euthanasia for babies, newborns. So, it's possible it will happen in Canada.
Alex, where do you really see this issue headed over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I see that we need a culture shift in a big way. So the fact that euthanasia is legal does not mean that euthanasia should be occurring. Now, we've had a huge number of euthanasias done already. So last year there was over 5,000 euthanasia deaths in Canada, and there's been over 13,000 since it was legalized. So what we've had is that we've had a fast social acceptance of euthanasia, and the numbers have grown very quickly. But the reality is the culture needs to recognize the importance of caring, and this is what's been missing. There's a couple things. First of all, the government did promise a huge influx of dollars for palliative care at the time of legalizing euthanasia, and we really haven't seen that. So that's the first issue. But secondly, people who believe in a caring society need to step up and recognize the importance of being with, caring for others. Recognize that when my neighbor is going through a difficult time in their life, that they're human. They're a human being. They need care. They need support. People choose euthanasia usually not because of deep physical pain and they feel there's no other way to deal with it. Usually what's happening is they're going through a very difficult time in their life. They're feeling that their life has lost purpose. They feel their life has lost any value. They're wondering what their future holds, and they have fear of that future. So they're seeking euthanasia, or someone's presenting the idea of euthanasia to them, and this is why they're going down that road. A caring society really changes that. We recognize the importance of the human person. We recognize that suffering alone is very difficult, but when you're with someone and you care about them, that in fact you can diminish that nature of suffering greatly. We also recognize that people go through depression, Hal. A lot of people go through deep depression. And when someone cares about them and they're with them and they spend time with them, somehow that depression is not the same anymore because we feel our life is valued. We've been, how would you say, affirmed in our value. This is where society needs to go.
Alex Schadenberg is the Executive Director of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Thanks so much for your time today, Alex.
Thank you, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.